is Samantha Neugebauer.
And I'm Katy Gathright.
And this is Short Story Boudoir, where we discuss one story every episode. Do you want to tell them, Katy, what we're talking about today?
Sure, yeah, I'll jump right in. So we are talking about a story called The Burglar by Sarah Shun-lien Bynum. And we chose the story for a lot of reasons, and that'll come out in the discussion. But one of the reasons was it takes place in Los Angeles, and we've been thinking a lot about the city with the fires earlier this month, at the beginning of 2025. So obviously just a horrible time. And if there's one nice thing about reading, it's that you can kind of pick places you want to go to or think about and spend time with. So that's kind of our thinking with this episode a little bit.
Absolutely. And I don't actually think we've ever picked a story before with the setting as like a requirement before.
Yeah. We're always like, what kind of writer? What's the style? So yeah, it was a good reason to pick a story, I think.
I agree. There will be spoilers.
Oh, yes. Always spoilers. And try not to be too jealous of our Valentine's Day desserts. Okay, so excited to chat about this one with you.
Yeah.
To start off with a brief summary of the story. The Burglar is a story that takes place largely over the course of not even a day in Los Angeles. And it actually includes 4 points of view. So we have a couple, a husband and a wife. We have the burglar, and then we have a character, Emmett. And Emmett is actually Emmett is one of the sort of tricks of the story. Well, we'll talk a lot about him. He's kind of the one named point of view character, which is interesting. But essentially we have the wife who is on her way home. She's a new homeowner along with her husband, and she's expecting an exterminator at her house, which is why when she arrives, she is slow to realize that the stranger in her house is actually a burglar. So we have the burglar who has come to this house to steal things. He's been kind of staking out this home as a home that might have Apple products inside. And so we have his point of view as he is kind of breaking in and then figuring out how to reckon with the wife coming home. And then we have the husband who is a TV writer. And so we get to go to work with him. He's in the writer's room, and he's been asked to kind of put in more work on one episode of his show, because this episode is featuring a black man who is has previously been framed after being innocent for a crime, but is now actually committing crimes. And the husband himself is a black man, and so he's having a kind of whole reckoning with how ethical is this episode that I'm writing? Am I actually proud of this episode? And then Emmett is the black man in question in the TV episode. So we actually get the point of view of the fictional character within this fictional story. And he ends up witnessing part of the burglary at the house. So a little bit of a convoluted story to describe, but
just read it, right?
Read anything out?
No, I don't think so. I think that was a great explanation.
Yeah, well, to your point of just read it, I guess I'm interested in talking about the entertainment factor of the story, because I do think, despite my sort of convoluted description, it's quite fast paced, and it's a pretty plotty story, and there are sort of twists and turns isn't quite right, but it's told in these very snappy segments. And it kind of has a crescendoing type feeling around this burglary that's happening at a house. And, I'm curious how you felt about that entertainment factor. I mean, it is a story in some ways where the Los Angeles of it all is a little bit submerged. We don't get flowery descriptions of the city or anything, but it's a city that runs on the entertainment industry. We've got a TV writer. The story itself is entertaining. I don't know. I just wanted to grapple with that a little bit.
Yeah, I thought this was a great question, and it actually really made me think of a theory or an effect that I had read about a long time ago called the estrangement effect. And it's a term from actually the playwriting sphere. This German playwright and critic and poet, Bertolt Brecht, coined it. And basically what it is that the structure of some kind of piece or work can actually push you out rather than let you kind of dissolve into the character. So typically we think of as, you know, stories let us walk in the shoes of someone else, right? Or, you know, we over-identify maybe with the character. And in this story, I really feel like you see this estrangement effect working where instead of having that over-identification with any of the characters, we are kind of whiplashed out of the realms of the story again and again. Because, you know, as Katie was saying, it's like a paragraph in one POV, you know, a paragraph in the next POV, you know, maybe a paragraph or two in some of the sections, but we're constantly rotating out.
Yeah.
And so for me, that meant that it was really difficult for me to over-identify with any of those POVs. And the last thing I'll say about the estrangement effect is that, like, instead then of identification, you're supposed to be critically thinking about a work. And so I don't know if I think of critically thinking about something as necessarily entertainment.
Yeah.
But it's very strange to me to think of the effect in literature of kind of this quick-paced POV shifts, almost like a Rolodex, is that it can be entertaining on one hand, but then on the other hand, it makes you not get immersed. So you're actually thinking of the piece as a whole and like kind of its morality more so than like the characters.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. It's almost like when you talk about something you're reading being entertaining, it's like there's maybe like two modes of entertainment. There's like entertaining in the sense of being like totally immersed, right? So like, yeah, maybe you're like reading like Anna Karenina and you're just like totally immersed in that world, and it's like entertaining in that sense because it's enveloping you.
Right.
And then there's maybe entertaining in the sense where you're like, oh, this is just like going quickly.
Right.
Like I'm entertained in the fact that like I am distracted enough from like other things around me that I'm able to like move through this piece. And that doesn't sound like something that would coincide with like critical thinking, but I think in this case it does. I mean, this isn't one of those stories that is simultaneously very like literary with the POV shifts and that kind of veneer that we're talking about, but it's also sort of strangely accessible because of the plot, the plottiness of it.
Yeah, and it really makes me think about how oftentimes we will talk about genre in terms of novels, but we don't necessarily talk about genre within short stories. Right. Like the short story is the genre, and then if it's like too sci-fi, it belongs in the sci-fi category.
Totally.
But this really made me think about the fact that like within literary fiction, like, you know, also this artificial category in many ways, like this maybe belongs to like a certain kind of genre actually, where like there is more entertainment than like a lot of the stories we talked about here.
Yeah, I think that's right. I was really thinking like, oh, this could be a novel, but it'd be so different if it was a novel. But what I think what makes me think that is that I don't know how to categorize this as a short story because we don't talk about short stories in that way.
Absolutely. And if it was a novel, I think the estrangement effect would not work because these sections maybe would be longer. Yeah. So you would feel yourself like over-identifying with one of the characters and really immersing yourself chapter by chapter potentially.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah.
And you had thoughts about like the characterness of it all too, because again we have characters and then we have a character.
Yeah, so we have characters like actually created by different characters in this story. So I was thinking about how you know, it's kind of common knowledge that the characters in our movies, in our stories, in our novels have real presence in our life, in our real world. They are embedded in our life. You know, we can, you know, we talk about someone like Scarlett O'Hara or Batman. Yeah. Like they were real people.
Yeah, I had a crush on Ron Weasley. It was like a real thing to me.
Exactly. And so I feel like we see this a lot in children's stories, maybe where characters like come to life in some way, or, you know, the toys we play with come to life. I was oddly thinking about a movie that my brother had really liked that is probably committing all kinds of sins, but I haven't seen in years, the Indian in the cover.
I was like, she's gonna say the Indian in the cover.
I am gonna say the Indian in the cover because it's such an easy manifestation of what we're talking about, right? And yet we actually don't see this happen in you know, in literature a lot. So seeing that happen was super interesting to me. So it made me very invested in the creator. It made me very invested in the husband character. Not only is like what he is grappling with, I think, very interesting because what you alluded to in your summary, Katie, was that also like this is his big chance. Like this is he is like financially supporting the family, right? Like he has to make this work. And so we see his character come to life, and we see how that character like embeds himself in the world, in the psyche. So my actual question though is, what is the wife's POV doing? What did you think about the wife's POV in this?
You know, I think similarly, like I struggle with the wife's POV the most, probably in this story. And I think for me, I mean, I think her POV is there actually as the narrative propulsion. Like she's sort of the vehicle through which we get to like see the burglary unfold. And it's sort of like the dramatic irony of her not realizing it's a burglar feels like one of the sort of major plot engines, right? But I think what's hard about her POV is that I think the story is unkind to the wife. So like, again, like we're kind of in her head as she's sort of like thinking about like, they're sort of like new homeowners. They're like reaching into like a new economic status together. She's having all of these like thoughts about money and how she can kind of like make financial problems go away because like there's enough like financial infrastructure in place now that it's like not a big deal to swallow like a parking ticket, for example. And so I guess like in some ways it's a little bit of an unfair fight because she is thinking about, she's put in a position to be like annoying in a way that the husband isn't, you know, like he gets to be the creator in the story. And then I also think it's like there's this sort of unkindness of her being dumb when she comes home and like not realizing that she's being burglared.
Just think of bugles.
Yum. And so it's sort of like she's put in this position too of like, oh, because she's so progressive, she's like willing to give this like stranger in her house the benefit of the doubt that they're supposed to be there. And like, I guess I think that's like interesting. It's like interesting to me, but it's like she's kind of like the fall guy in the story for that kind of thinking.
I think specifically she sees the burglar like coming down the steps, and the company that is like spraying for termites in the house is called Greenleaf, and she's like, oh, good on Greenleaf, like hiring an African American or something. And you're like cringing inside for her a little bit, right? I think you're right. I think she is the fall guy, and I think that more maybe could have been done with the idea that a lot of like her thoughts mainly are like kind of very practical and mundane compared to the husband's thoughts in a way. So when you're in her POV and we spend kind of an equal amount of time in her POV, it's just not like really as interesting.
Totally. It's just a little bit like, it's not as interesting, and it's sort of like we've been there before. It feels like a little bit stock character-ish.
Which is interesting because that's the exact thing that the husband is trying to avoid with like this other type of archetype.
And maybe that's intentional a little bit. Like she is her own archetype, and I actually hadn't thought about that, which is interesting. I mean, I'm curious like what you make of her trajectory in the story, because again, the like climax, I guess, on paper of this story is when the burglar and her kind of have a conversation, and he's like, I'm gonna pull out a gun, and she's like disbelieving of it. And like the gun goes off. I don't know. I sort of felt in a way like I thought the story was maybe building to something more violent, to be honest. And she's kind of spared a little bit, like she, I don't know, has like a minor injury, and there's like a flash forward in which her life isn't really that much changed. I don't know. Like I wonder if we would feel differently about the wife if like something more sinister had happened to her at that climactic moment. I don't know. I'm curious how that worked for you.
I'm trying to think, like, because it's always a violation when someone like enters your home or space, right? It is like a big deal that they were robbed, but on the other hand, it does feel like she got off very easily. And I wonder if that choice was made sort of so that attention of the piece wasn't about like how far the perpetrator went.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that I would have liked it to be, which sounds absolutely crazy, either a little bit more violent in some way, because I very much believe in that idea that Elizabeth McCracken wrote about in a book review, where I'd rather read about disaster than discomfort.
Yeah.
Right? Or if that wasn't the case, then we need to like see why even this kind of lower level of crime hurts the psyche. And I think that could be really interesting, but we didn't really get that.
Yeah, you're right.
So like one of the things the husband is grappling with is like he, in his television show, needs to make his character like do something bad.
Yeah.
Right? And so actually if he makes him do like a lesser crime, like does that still kind of have like a negative effect in the world, like in people's perception of Black men, like all these things? Or like the severity of the crime is one thing, but maybe it's just like if little criminal activity also doesn't solve the problem.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, right. I think it's always dangerous to be like, oh, here's like a hypothetical how the story could have gone, how I would have reacted, because I actually do like where the story ends.
Me too.
In a way. Like I do like the poignancy of like Emmett coming in and witnessing it, and like the way he calls the burglar a boy, and like the two Black men like sort of like seeing each other, and there being like more truth and honesty in that assessment than this like wife was able to give.
Right.
And I do like that, all against the fact that like the wife is not, even though we were sort of giving her a hard time, like she's like in an interracial marriage, she's not like I don't know, some like villain really either.
Absolutely. And that's what's really curious. Like it wasn't necessarily like a story that is like critiquing like white liberalism in a way, right? It wasn't even like necessarily always critiquing the wife. Like I don't think I wouldn't have wanted her to like make different choices. Like that wouldn't have improved the story for me.
No, it's a weird, it's hard to talk about because it's almost like the wife POV is like a rough edge that kind of like needs to be there in the story. Or maybe it's just that the like other stuff is so interesting, like the husband's point of view is really interesting, and like I really enjoyed being with the burglar.
Me too.
Who was like a funny character.
He was so funny.
Actually. Like really quite like charming. And like
he's trying to like find things to steal in this house, and like they're like newly middle class or upper middle class, so like they don't have
the
great
watches.
things.
And it's like, oh, comic book collection, like, interesting. Like I don't know, it was really like delightful. Absolutely. Is actually the word I would use.
I'm definitely a fan as well of that final image. And so I don't actually have a segue to that into my kind of final question, but my final question is about LA as a setting, right? So I'm wondering in general how you think place is operating the story, and in what ways is LA important to the story? Why is it set here?
Yeah, totally. Well, I think we probably could have picked a story that felt more traditionally LA. Again, that had like more description of like traffic or like the seaside or something, not to be flip. But I mean, I do think like, again, I when I romanticize LA, I think like, wow, it would be so cool to live in a place where everybody is so invested in storytelling, right? Like there's a whole industry like built on storytelling. Like how like lovely is that? And I do think you feel that in this story. Like I do think you feel, besides the fact that the husband just like works in TV, like again, like there's sort of like a meta interest in storytelling with all the POVs. Like it's like a little bit like the story in a way you could say it's similar to watching a movie or a TV show in the way that it can like cut into different scenes, right? Or like splice different points of view together. And then I do sort of feel like the like striving aspect of the story like feels really prominent to me, and you could say that about a lot of other places too, but again, that sort of like city of stars, like trying to use storytelling as a lever to like, I don't know, remake yourself is interesting to me.
Absolutely. I agree with a lot of what you're saying, and the idea too that ultimately this story was like very LA in the way that like we don't hear about LA a lot. Like it's just like a kind of a suburban neighborhood. Like the husband is not like some household name.
Yeah.
And I actually think it was perfect for us to pick right now because we are seeing a lot come out of this tragedy about like kind of the regular people that are affected by these fires. Like, and I feel like these people would be those people, right? These people are not people with multiple mansions, etc. Which is obviously horrible for those people as well when they lose their memories. But I think that that it's a really nice reminder that like suburban America kind of is also existing in LA County.
Totally. The sprawl.
The sprawl is there.
Sure. Well, should we talk about our favorite lines?
I think so.
I'll go first.
Okay.
So this is a line that is from an Emmett POV section towards the end.
Okay.
So again, he kind of comes into the story towards the end anyway, and he, like, again, kind of encounters this house as well. So this is the description. He drifts from window to window, and a part of him understands dimly that this is not the house he is looking for, that none of them are, that the house he is looking for and the girl who lives inside it are in some profound way no longer available to him. And I liked this moment because I think it's of a piece with what you were saying earlier about like how powerful it is when like a fictional character like breaks out and kind of enters life, because the story isn't really full of very many like sentimental moments like this. In fact, this is sort of like one of the more like dreamier sentences or like more like sort of like sentences more aimed at like profundity than any other part of the story. And I like that is given to Emmett, you know. It's sort of like Emmett gets to have the power to be like sort of dreamy and like on a more metaphysical plane than the other characters who are not characters in this story.
Absolutely. I think this was gorgeous writing here. I think the most gorgeous writing was in both the robber and kind of Emmett's pieces. And after you picked this quote, I was like, I should have picked that quote, because I just thought it was so good. And it also made me think about like how we conceptualize time and justice, like in that if this person is real and these, you know, something unjust happened to him like in the mid 20th century, like is you know, the husband character getting this opportunity making up for that or not? Yeah, you know. Totally. And this quote really just kind of blossoms for me. Yeah, the more I think about it.
Yeah, me too.
Really,
it sits well.
Great.
I think.
Yeah. Okay, so my quote, I'm going to read and then explain. So, what sorts of crimes are committed by an unjustly incarcerated man who's traveled through a rift in the space-time continuum? There's not much for our team of special agents to do if Attica inmate number 243 pops up in present-day New York and spends his days being decent. It's really funny, yeah. And so, like, the husband is tasked with, like, making this character, like, do bad things. And what's so interesting about this is like what it says about storytelling itself, right? Like we need bad things to happen for stories. We need conflict. Yeah, we need conflict. And so again, much like your quote, I feel like it's very much a part of the story. Yeah. But we can also like apply it to storytelling in general, and like sort of like our idea of like being communal people or individuals, like it's just so good. Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah. Yeah, we recommend this story.
Absolutely. I think, it's like feels different and is interestingly structured, so much so that it was hard to describe. But I hope this discussion makes you want to read it or reread it. Absolutely. So thank you for talking about it with me.
Thank you. Yeah, and I hope that you all have a happy Valentine's Day.
Yes. Yes. Enjoy. Stay warm out there. Hope you eat some dessert when you log off.
Yeah.
Bye.